Hello everybody, how are you doing? I wanted to put out this video even though, as you probably know if you follow me on Twitter, we've been going through this blackout and we have our power back now, thankfully. We did have it out for a couple of days and then it was on and off. But a pipe burst in our house, and so long story short, we have not had water, running water for a couple of days, and it's hard to get a plumber out here with everything that's going on in our area. With this storm and everything that's been in the news, this blackout. So anyway, if it looks like I have dirty hair and I'm tired and I'm not wearing makeup, that's a pretty accurate appraisal. So I hope that this is okay. I know it's not the most appealing look, but let's get to it. So I am definitely going to do a Marilyn Manson video follow-up in the next couple of weeks. I also am probably going to do a Woody Allen video in the next couple of days. But I want to get back to my roots, so to speak, tonight and talk about Johnny Depp tonight, and in particular, just some interesting things that I found as I've been doing my research over the past weeks on this situation. And in particular, I want to focus on a couple of interviews that he did in the last few years. One of them was that notorious Rolling Stone interview that I know a lot of people hated and Johnny hated. And the thing is, I agree that that interview had at times a very negative slant toward Johnny and was unfair in the way that it at times presented things. But I also think that if you read it with that understanding, with a critical eye, I think that there were still was a lot of fascinating information and a lot of interesting things that Johnny said. And all right, so the title of this article is the Trouble with Johnny Depp. And of course you can see with the title and then with the picture that they choose to use that they're going for a particular slant. So we understand that. I don't even have to really explain that to you, okay? So what I want to do is just jump right into it and talk about what I find interesting here. This is an article by, who wrote this? Stephen Roderick, all right, for Rolling Stone. It says, Johnny Depp isn't here yet. Still, his presence is all around the 10,500 square foot rented mansion at 16 Bishopswood Road in London's Highgate neighborhood. He is here in the busy hands of Russell, his personal chef, working up the Peking duck. He is here in this stogie-sized joint left by the sink in the guest bathroom. He is here in the never-ending reservoir of wine that is poured into goblets. And he is here in a half-done painting upstairs that features a burning black house, a child Johnny, and an angry woman who resembles his mother, Betty Sue. Now, there's a couple of things here that I think are kind of interesting. First of all, the fact that he left a joint by the sink in the guest bathroom. I guess is a kind of a gift for the guest, which I think is kind of funny. And then, somewhat more disturbingly, it says that he has a painting that I guess we're meant to understand that Depp is painting, a half-done painting. And it's a painting of a burning black house, Johnny as a child, and an angry woman who looks like his mother. So it's very interesting. And the reason that I stop on this is because one of the things that Johnny has talked about in interviews, is the fact that his mother was, quote, the meanest woman that he ever met, the meanest person he ever met. He talked about how he said that at her funeral, in her eulogy. And I think that as we talked about before, it's not an accident or it's not a surprise that he ended up with someone like Amber Heard, someone who probably has a personality disorder and is psychologically abusive and pathological, because that seems to be exactly the kind of relationship that he had with his mother, and he's going to talk about that a little bit later. And so he says, the writer says, Depp has come from a photo shoot for the Hollywood Vampires, his sometime band that features Alice Cooper and Joe Perry. Trailing behind is his lawyer, Adam Waldman. Depp is dressed like a 40s gangster, jet black hair, slicked back, pinstripes, suspenders, and spats. I actually don't know what spats are, but somebody can tell me in the comments, all right? So, and it says his face is puffy, but Depp still, the writer had to put that in, right? His face is puffy, but Depp still possesses the fixating brown eyes that have toggled between dreamy and menacing during his 35-year career. Now, Depp's studious leer is reminiscent of late-era Marlon Brando. Now, again, this is one of the things that's unfortunate about this article. Some of the choices of words, so you probably know, like a leer. It's like a kind of a stare, but almost like someone who's like, I don't know, like drunk or something in a way. And he compares him to Marlon Brando. And of course, Marlon Brando is an amazing actor. If you've seen The Godfather or you've seen Apocalypse Now, that's actually what Colonel Kurtz, where the name comes from, if you didn't know. So anyway, point is, but Brando, in his later years, he became extremely eccentric and had some legal issues, or his children had legal issues, and basically became known, he gained a lot of weight and became known as this, unfortunately, as this kind of weirdo. And Johnny Depp, of course, worked with Marlon Brando on, Don Juan DeMarco, right? And became friends with Brando, and it was kind of Brando who gave him the idea or the inspiration to buy the house in the Bahamas, so to buy an island in the Bahamas. So anyway, the point is, the way that the writer is setting this up and is describing him, he's really fixated on this idea of Johnny Depp as this really sort of weirdly past his prime. So you see what kind of an article this is going to be, and yet I do think there's some interesting stuff in it, even to debunk. Okay. It says, this isn't a coincidence, since Depp has long built his life by imitating his legends. Again, they're trying to kind of paint him in this pathological way, I feel like. But it is also true that Johnny Depp has, throughout his career, has become friends with some of these people who were heroes of his, right? Hunter S. Thompson and stuff, which is fine, and Brando. All right. So continuing on the article, so Johnny Depp now, he's going to speak. He's introducing himself to the interviewer when they meet. Hey, I'm Johnny. Good to meet you. He reaches out a right hand whose fingers recently had their tattoos changed from Slim, a reference to his ex-wife Amber Heard, to Scum. So, are you here to hear the truth? Asks Depp, as Russell brings him a glass of vintage red wine. So if you want to kind of get the atmosphere of this and the picture of this, okay, as it's been described, is that Johnny is at home in his London house. He's about to have this dinner that's prepared by his personal chef, Russell, and Adam Waldman, his attorney, is described as basically being in tow. And so, a number of you I know are big Adam Waldman fans, which is great. But anyway, so Adam Waldman is going to be present for this interview, but also is kind of just hanging out as well. And you do get the idea that Adam Waldman and Johnny really are more than a client relationship. It really is a kind of a friend relationship. All right. We move to the Oh, no. So Johnny says, so are you here to hear the truth? He says, it's full of betrayal. Then the interviewer says, we move to the dining room for a 3-course meal of pad thai, duck, and gingerbread with berries. Gingerbread with berries sounds good. Depp sits at the head of the table and motions towards some rolling papers and 2 equal piles of tobacco and hash, and asks if I mind. I don't. He pauses for a second. Well, let's drink some wine first. Then there's a break in the article, and there's just one line after this, and it says, this goes on for 72 hours. Now, it's interesting how the writer of the article is going to really make something out of the fact that this interview goes on, and Johnny talks so much. I think, again, this interviewer is setting this up to make it sound like it's like Johnny is going to just, like, he's going to talk forever and drink forever, and it's out of control and all of that. When really it is not uncommon when reporters are doing extended interviews and stories on subjects for them to spend more than just an afternoon with the subject, for them to spend some time with that subject. And, of course, the whole point is that Johnny is supposed to be talking to this guy and letting the guy get to know him. And so it would seem like sitting around at home, relaxed, if you having a drink or drinks or smoking or whatever, that doesn't seem like that's bizarre behavior, but of course that's how it's going to be contextualized in this article. So again, just reading critically, and this was one of the reasons why Johnny did not like this article. The point is, he gives some background on this conflict that Johnny Depp was in with his old management partners, or his longtime business manager, Joel Mandel, and his group. And I'm not going to get into all of that. It was settled. And honestly, I don't know who was in the right or wrong. After reading about it, I think that it was one of those things where there are probably some screw ups on both sides. So I'm gonna keep going here. It says the Mandels categorically, that's the management group, categorically deny all wrongdoing and are countersuing, alleging that Depp breached his oral contract with the company. The suit suggests that Depp has a $2 million a month compulsory spending disorder. So what they've been saying basically, and what they had been saying, this management group that Depp was accusing of malpractice and so forth, is that Johnny Depp basically has this out of control spending problem, and that he blames his financial situation on his management group. And again, I don't want to get into the ins and outs of it, but I will say that it definitely seems, from what I have read and from even statements that Johnny Depp has made, that he does have a spending problem. And, I can see that's not an uncommon thing among celebrities and wealthy people, right? Look, it's easy to spend millions of dollars, I think, just like it's easy to run through hundreds of dollars. But the point is that I think that was an interesting dimension of this article that it gets into at times, and I do think that there's something kind of legitimate about that in terms of it's a facet of Depp's character that probably needs to be reined in, right? Just like his susceptibility perhaps to someone unstable like Amber Heard, or his drug problem or whatever, right? It's just a character study. And it does seem to be something that comes up, is that he really, likes extravagant spending, and it's hard to rein it in. Okay, keep going. It says, over the past 18 months, there's been little but bad news for Depp. In addition to the financial woes, there were reports he couldn't remember his lines and had to have them fed to him through an earpiece. He had split from his longtime lawyer and agent, and he was alone. His tabloid-scarred divorce from actress Amber Heard is complete, but not before there were persuasive allegations. They say persuasive. That's another issue with this, article. But persuasive allegations of physical abuse that Depp vehemently denies. Depp's inner circle had begged him not to wed Heard or to at least obtain a prenup. Depp ignored his loved one's advice. Now, this is, I thought, one of the more interesting things that we get from this article, and also stuff I read elsewhere, is that apparently there were a number of people like his sister, Christy Dombrowski, that he did trust in his inner circle, who were telling him, begging him, please don't marry Amber Heard. And of course, if you remember Doug Stanhope's essay that he wrote, and I wish that I had time tonight to go through that, but I will maybe at some point. But the famous comedian Doug Stanhope, good friend of Johnny Depp's, and after Amber Heard, came out with these charges, these accusations, and paraded around with the fake bruise and all of that, Stanhope came out and posted this article, this essay, talking about how, every single person in Johnny Depp's inner circle, all of his friends, thought that Amber Heard from day one was a disaster. But he said that they were all afraid to say anything, because if you said something, you were afraid that you would be banished from the inner circle. And in fact, one of the things that I found out, and probably a lot of you know this, is that the reason why Depp had a falling out with his sister, his one of his long-term companions, his sister Christy Dombrowski, after all these years of her being his trusted advisor and everything and producer, the main reason why he had a falling out with her, the reason, is because she did not want him to marry Amber. She didn't approve of Amber. She thought Amber was terrible for him, and he sided with Amber in that, and so he resented it, what his sister said. And so I think that it's interesting, when we think about, I want to do a video sometime on Elvis, because I read a biography of Elvis, and I think Elvis is very fascinating. But, you know, one of the things that you see if you're looking at Elvis, or if you're looking at Michael Jackson, or if you're looking at Johnny Depp, or all kinds of different stars, is that because and this is not a knock on Johnny Depp's character or anything, it's just the nature of the beast, but when you get to have that sort of mega superstar status, you know the cliche, it's that people stop telling you no, and so forth. And I do think that is almost a kind of a universal thing among the movie stars. I think it takes like a lot of effort to not let that happen to you. It's kind of like the story about the old emperor who I can't remember who it was it some Roman emperor, but he paid a guy to, according to the mythology, he paid this guy to follow him around from place to place and to continually whisper in his ear, "You are only a man. You're only a man," right? And so anyway, okay, so the interviewer is going to go on here. He says, "During my London visit, Depp is alternately hilarious, sly, and incoherent. The days begin after dark and run until first light." So it's interesting. It's he's like his friend Marilyn Manson. Johnny likes the late hours, likes to stay up late. The interviewer says there is a scared, hunted look about him. Again, I don't know how much of that is embellishment for the article. It says, "Despite grand talks about hitting the town, we never leave the house. As Depp's mind leads us down various rabbit holes, I often think of a line that he recited as the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland. Quote, 'Have I gone mad?' Now, I think this is really unfair, and no doubt this is one of the things that Depp didn't like is, basically what the interviewer is saying here is that we hung out for several nights at his house, and because the point of it is for Depp to talk to this guy, yes, Depp's going to talk. He's going to tell him how he feels and tell him stories and at times ramble and so on and so forth. And this interviewer, the article writer, is really, I think, taking it and twisting it in an unfair way. But even so, there's some interesting stuff we're going to get into. It says here, this is, again, the writer. And from here on out, it's just going to always be the writer, unless I tell you Depp is saying it. So just assume when I'm quoting the article that this is what the writer is writing, okay? Unless it's a quote from Depp, and I'll tell you. It says, his closest confidant seems to be Adam Waldman, a lawyer he met less than 2 years ago. Waldman, 49, possesses an unlined face, sandy hair, a designer black leather jacket, and a soothing voice that could make the bird flu epidemic sound reasonable. He tells me he is married to, quote, the world's #1 face doctor. So I guess Adam Waldman is married to a plastic surgeon or a dermatologist or something like that. And I guess is not shy about the fact that he's had work done, which was fine, right? But anyway, and I like the way the guy says he has a soothing voice that could make the bird flu epidemic sound reasonable. I've never heard Adam Waldman speak, and so I always imagined, because his Twitter posts are very sort of kind of flamboyant in a way, or hard-hitting as well, whatever way you want to think about it. I don't think about him as being a very like soft-spoken, soothing person, but that's interesting. They say that. All right. It says, Depp seems oblivious to any personal responsibility for his current predicament. Waldman seems to have convinced Depp that they are freedom fighters taking on the Hollywood machine rather than scavengers squabbling over the scraps of a fortune squandered. Again, I think that this could be really unfair phrasing here. The way it's depicting Depp and Waldman, it sounds like what Waldman is doing actually is it sounds like Depp, from the way that this is going to be described, it sounds like things were going very badly for Depp in a number of ways, as we know with the Amber Heard thing, but also legally with his finances and his relationship with his management company. And it sounds like he was really like in need of not only legal help, but in need of someone to kind of come and give him, a little bit of, hey, we can do this and everything. So to me, actually, if I read between the lines on this article, it tells me that Adam Waldman is not just a really good lawyer, but a really good motivator for his clients. And, what clients need is at times is a fighting spirit, I think. And so that's what I read here, even though that it's depicted in the article as being something sinister. If you're going to go through all of these legal hurdles that Johnny Depp has been forced to go through for the last however many years. I mean, that is extremely, I can't even imagine how taxing that is, how tiring, how demoralizing, and so forth. And so to me, to have a lawyer who has this attitude and is able to instill this attitude in a client, that seems great. So again, I think the article's being unfair. One day, Depp shows me his artwork, and it strikes me that Depp is now a worn Dorian Gray. So I'm not going to get into explaining that reference. It's a literary reference, but basically it's a kind of a pretentious way of saying that Johnny Depp is over the hill and it passed his expiration date and is needs to grow up. And so anyway, not very kind. I don't like that, but anyway. And then it's going to make a reference to Elvis, too. I just said something earlier about Elvis, and so it's interesting. Maybe because I read this and it was in my head. But it's going to compare him to Elvis in his last days, which, again, he's not depicting him in the nicest way here. Elvis, like I said, I want to do an interview or a video about Elvis's biography, but Elvis in his last days, you've seen pictures, very, bloated, unhealthy and kind of a ridiculous figure, sort of drunk acting during some of his later performances and stuff. So anyway, and then it's going to bring up Tom Petty, and it gives us this anecdote about them. It says Depp and Tom Petty had long been friends, and Petty's death hit Depp very hard. Depp says, "We'd call each other and ask, 'Hey, you still smoking?' Depp recalls. Tom would go, 'Yeah, I'm still smoking.' And I'd feel better. Well, if Tom is still smoking, I'm okay." Depp goes quiet, perhaps realizing the sadness of what he's just said. He wipes his eyes. "I loved him," he said. And I think it's interesting how in this article and also in some others I've read, like the GQ article, it talks about how Depp at times will tear up, will wipe his eyes about different things. Clearly, a very, emotional and sensitive person. It says that the two shared more in common than an addiction to nicotine. They both arrived in LA from Florida, intent on making it as rockers. Depp changed course after an LA drinking buddy named Nicolas Cage told him there was money to make in acting. He eventually starred in his breakout role as a high school narc on 21 Jump Street in 1987. So you've probably heard, a number of you have heard this story, but originally, Depp wanted to be a rock star, and that's why he's doing the musical thing right now. It's because he says that his first love was music. He considers himself a failed musician. I don't know about that, but that's what he says. And, it's interesting, too, a number of you probably know that his deep friendship with Marilyn Manson goes back way beyond their LA years to when they were both struggling musicians in Florida playing the Fort Lauderdale circuit, I've read. And so they knew each other going way back when both were struggling musicians. And it's interesting that both of their bands initially had the title Kids. It was Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids. And then Johnny Depp's band was called The Kids. So that's kind of an interesting thing as well. But Johnny Depp gets to LA and he becomes friends sort of randomly with Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage is the one who encouraged him to really get into acting because he said that there was more money to be made in acting than there was in music. And so Nicolas Cage actually recommended Johnny Depp to his agent, and the agent took Johnny Depp on, and then Johnny Depp got the role in Nightmare on Elm Street and said that he was shocked because it was more money than he had ever made in his life, right there. And he was like, wow, this acting thing is pretty lucrative. And Johnny Depp says that he grew to appreciate it, grew to love it, but that music was always his first love, and I guess still is. It's kind of interesting. All right, so the interviewer says, we sit down for dinner, and I ask if he remembers the first big purchase he made when he started making money. He rolls another joint that he first passes to me and then to Waldman. Now, I think, again, for those of you who are Waldman stans, I think this is an interesting thing. You know, this idea of Johnny Depp sitting around smoking weed with Adam Waldman. I just think that's kind of funny. And apparently it's probably something that goes on perhaps more than occasionally. I don't know. But I like the idea of that, the two of them sitting around smoking weed. All right, so Johnny says that the first big purchase he made when he started making money was not a car, but a house for his mama. Johnny says, quote, "My mom was born in a holler in eastern Kentucky. Her poor ass was on phenobarbital at 12. All right, now, a couple of things here. So a holler, if you don't know, it's basically like a shack, and it's usually, you know, and it's in the middle of, kind of in the middle of nowhere, like in the middle of, you know, the hills or the woods. And so what it's meant to imply is pretty much like the most primitive form of living in terms of having, you know, only the bare necessities and not even that half the time, and being isolated and being very, very poor. And so it's interesting that he talks about that. He mentions phenobarbital. You know, barbiturates are not prescribed anymore because they were so strong. And so if you ever heard about Quaaludes, if you like seen Wolf of Wall Street or Scarface where they talk about Quaaludes, that's what they're talking about. But you can't even really get them now, apparently. All right, so, you know, it's just interesting here that he's talked about how his mother was very mean and very abusive and hit him constantly and all of these terrible things. And yet he also shows an appreciation for the reasons for that, perhaps. And I know a lot of people are born into poverty and don't become abusers, right? But he's just saying that his mom had a really hard beginning and giving her some credit for that. And so, you know, he loves his mother, and despite the abuse that he went through. It says that Depp grew up the youngest of four, raised mostly by his mother, Betty Sue. His father was a civil engineer, but largely absent. They lived first in Kentucky and then Florida, moving, according to Depp, more than 40 times. His mom hurled things and hit him, but she was still his mom. Depp says, "Yes, there were irrational beatings. Maybe it's an ashtray coming your way. Maybe you're going to get clunked with the phone. It was a ghost house. No one talked. I don't think there ever was a way I thought about people, especially women, other than I can fix them." So if you catch what he's saying here, he's just described, and it's interesting because he's just described all of this abuse that his mother put him through. And then he says, and even today, my attitude toward abusive, basically saying toward abusive people, especially women, is that I can fix them. And I think that, you know, there's just so much obviously here in terms of his motivation for putting up with what he put up with from Amber Heard. Because, you know, if you'll remember, one of the things that Jennifer Howell said in, I can't remember I think it was the letter that she wrote to Whitney, or was it her testimony? I can't remember. But anyway, one of the things that she said was that Whitney was just always amazed that Johnny kept putting up with this behavior from Amber, with this abuse and constantly berating him and throwing things and even hitting him. Well, I think this tells us something about that, right? That there's a reason why Johnny was attracted to that kind of a character, right? It's you know, it was like Freud would say, we're attracted to the parental figures because they represent our first experience of love. And so, you know, even if consciously we tell ourselves, I don't want to be with an abusive person, or I don't want to be with someone, you know, like my dad or my mom or whatever, if they were problematic, and yet we find ourselves unconsciously or semi-consciously being drawn to unhealthy patterns. Okay, that's the whole essence of the idea of the Freudian repetition compulsion that I think I've talked about in another article, but another video. But it's also interesting here too when he talks about his mom is this desire to fix her, and so, you know, again, you wonder if he kept hanging on for so long with Amber because he kept thinking, you know, as people often do when they're trapped in these cycles with people with personality disorders and abusers, they think, I keep thinking I can fix them. Mostly, Depp remembers his mother coming home from double shifts at her waitressing job. He would rub her feet as she counted out the coins from her tips. He bought her a small horse farm outside of Lexington, Kentucky with one of his first big paydays. So that's interesting. He bought his mom a horse farm. Depp says, Betty Sue, his mom, Betty Sue, I worshipped her, says Depp. But his smile quickly fades. Now this is interesting, okay? Catch this, because I think this really says something about his psychology here. Because the first thing he says is, I worshipped her. Betty Sue, I worshipped her. And then it says, as soon as he says that, his smile quickly fades. He gets this new sort of somber look on his face. And then he says this, she could be a real bitch on wheels. He tells me what he said at her 2016 funeral, quote, my mom was maybe the meanest human being I've ever met in my life. Now, I've commented on this in another video, but, you know, to say that someone is the meanest human being that you have ever met in your life, and to say that about your mother, and I realized that he was also saying it in sort of a joking way at the funeral, a sort of nostalgic way or something even, maybe. But still, to say that, the meanest person you've ever met, that is mean. That is one mean lady, and it makes me sad for him. I'm not about to cry, but it makes me sad. And it's interesting too, the dichotomy here, the tension or juxtaposition between how he first says, I worshipped her. Now think about worship. Again, these are extreme superlatives, because he's not just saying, I loved her, or yeah, she was my mom, I had warm feelings toward her, or whatever. He says, I worshipped her, right? And then, in this almost the same breath, it says, then he pauses, and then he says, she could be a real bitch on wheels. She's maybe the meanest person I've ever met. That sort of psychological split there, that is one of the most challenging things about going through abuse, whether as a child or as an adult, or being in an abusive relationship of any kind, is that there is such a sharp dichotomy there between the positive traits and qualities of the person and the negative abusive traits, and trying to put that together in your mind. And some people tend to be even drawn to those types of extremes. And so I think it's interesting there that we see that real sort of split in his psyche. And that's one of the hard things about coming out of an abusive home or situation, is that it's hard to take those two extremes, the good and the bad, and to know what to make of that, right? Because it would be one thing if a parent were just all bad, and then you could just say, oh, well, I'm through with them, right? But it's rarely like that, and that's the problem, right? And that's the thing that I've talked about this with my friends too, who have had abusive parents, and they talk about how it's so hard to know how to feel about that person, right? And this is apparently something that Johnny Depp struggled with his mother, and then also with Amber, right? How to feel about someone who on the one hand has some amazing qualities and you love, and on the other hand is monstrous in many ways, and that tension that's never resolved, okay? So he talked about his mother there, and then it says, after buying the Kentucky house for his mom, Depp treated himself to a Harley Davidson. Talks about, I'm going to skip through some of this. Okay. It says, Depp acquired a taste for the grandiose life along the way. He bought the Viper Room in the early 1990s. He suffered through the death of his friend River Phoenix from an overdose at the club. Imagine living with that, says Depp, his eyes clouding over. Sorry. It says he chafed against playing the standard, dashing Hollywood hero. An advisor yelled at him when he took the title role in Ed Wood. Johnny says, the guy told me, Johnny, it's not about you doing black and white movies about a cross-dressing D-movie director. So in other words, Johnny wanted to do these edgy, artistic, different roles, and the Hollywood establishment was trying to tell him to do the formulaic thing that a lot of male stars do, of the dashing leading man or whatever. It says a constant in Depp's business was his older sister Christy, who managed his day-to-day affairs. In 1999, they realized that his current management company couldn't handle his rapidly expanding financial affairs and they needed to move to a bigger firm. By then, Depp had moved above Sunset Boulevard to an 8,000 square foot estate nicknamed Dracula's Castle. He spent a day interviewing financial managers. His last meeting, he says, was with Robert and Joel Mandel, brothers who ran TMG. Now, just to understand what's going on here is like they're saying that at a certain point, when Depp really began to rake in the money and became a big star, they realized his sister, who had been helping to manage his affairs and stuff, they realized that they needed a more sophisticated company to do this. And so he interviewed these different companies, and one of them, the last one that he interviewed, was this particular company, these Mandel brothers, TMG, and this, of course, would be the company that he would, and the brothers that he would end up having a falling out with and would end up suing, and they would end up settling for an undisclosed sum. And Depp would accuse them of malpractice. They would accuse him of causing problems and of being in denial about his financial situation and overspending and so forth. And probably, I honestly think that probably they were both right. I think that just from what I've read, and there's a lot I don't know, but just from the little bit I've read, it seems like that TMG probably was doing some shady stuff. But also it seems like Depp had and maybe has, but had a spending problem and was in denial and didn't want to deal with it. And he even kind of admits it. He says, look, I'm an artist and stuff. I don't want to have to be focusing on the details of money and things like that, which is not uncommon in Hollywood. So it says here he had this meeting. He was trying to interview financial advisors, and his last meeting was with these Mandel brothers. And it says, Depp says he immediately took a shine to Joel, the youngest child of an Auschwitz survivor. Depp saw a kindred spirit. Quote, he was a nervous wreck. He was pouring sweat. He was broken. Now, in other words, what they're saying here is that when Depp was interviewing these brothers, that one of them seemed very nervous and was pouring sweat, and Depp could see that he was nervous, okay? The interviewer says to Depp, I asked him why he would place his money in the hands of a person he would describe as, quote, broken. Depp says because he felt a kinship. Depp says, quote, the monofilament that goes through all of my movie characters, if you look, they're all broken. Now, this is really interesting, too. And what's interesting about it is that basically what Depp is saying, and I'm sorry, Depp fans, that I'm laughing at him here, but, we have to laugh when things are absurd or funny. But what he's saying is that he was interviewing financial advisors, and he basically went with the one that seemed like they were the most fucked up. Intentionally. That may have been one of his big problems there. But it's interesting. He's very open about it. He admits it. Okay, so I just thought that was interesting there. The interviewer says, I try to probe deeper, but Depp is restless. The mansion is spookily quiet. It's now 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and his cook and security guards have all retired. Despite the hour, Depp's mind is a spaceball ricochet, moving through a random series of flashcards of his life. All right, now, it says he flips through the news. Depp flips through the news, so he's watching TV now. I skipped over a little bit of stuff, but he's watching TV now. He and the interviewer and Adam Waldman are sitting around really late at night, middle of the night, and having been drinking and smoking weed and stuff, middle of the night, watching TV. It says he flips through the news and comes across a report on Harvey Weinstein. Depp shakes his head, calls him an asshole for burying his film Dead Man, and then he says this. It says Depp pauses, ruminating on whether he is being unkind. He mentions that once he tagged along as Weinstein was picking up his kid from school, and that he could tell Weinstein really loved her, really loved his child. Quote, the image that took my breath away was Harvey Weinstein, a Goliath Shrek thing, bending down to put on his daughter's raincoat. So it's this moment there where Depp's talking about, yeah, he was a bully, yeah, he was a shitty guy and everything. And then kind of remembering, though, this episode where Weinstein, was being very tender with his daughter and bending down to put on her raincoat. And again, I think it's interesting how we can see the way that Johnny Depp's mind works with some of these problematic characters in his life, is that on the one hand, you will say, yes, they did these horrible things, but then on the other hand, we have to remember that they have this beautiful other dimension, right? Which is a very fair point. But again, I wonder if that kind of thinking, that kind of very sort of forgiving or open-mindedness, I wonder if that led him into problems with Amber. It says, outside, the London dark is giving way to a pre-dawn. Everyone is exhausted except for Depp. He disappears for a few minutes and returns, reanimated, and then proclaims, now I don't know if the writer was trying to insinuate something there, because he talks about how basically everyone's tired except Depp, and then Depp goes away and returns. I don't know if he was almost trying to insinuate something about drugs. He doesn't come out and say it, and I hope that that's not the insinuation. But at the very least, it does seem like he does frequently, the writer does frequently try to make something negative out of the fact that Depp stays up late, likes to talk a lot, has a lot of energy, in which I think, it's very problematic and unfortunate that he does that, because, these could just be, like, good qualities as well. Why does it have to be negative that he stays up late or wants to talk or what have you? But anyway. He proclaims that we have to watch his good friend Marilyn Manson's Kill For Me video, starring Depp, in a series of lewd poses with barely clad women. Now, I'll show you some scenes from it here, some images from it here. I'm not going to show you the music video, because I don't want to get copyright infringement, but it is, it's a Marilyn Manson video. It's risque, and it's interesting that Depp has been in a couple of Marilyn Manson videos. You might find them interesting if you're a fan of Depp or Manson. But anyway, so again, the idea here, it's an interesting kind of scene where, like, it's really late at night, sort of the end of the night, beginning of the morning, and Depp is sitting around with Waldman and with the interviewer, and, like, they're tired after a long night, and he's wanting to show them his buddy Marilyn Manson's video that he's in. It says, Depp cranks the television volume and shouts above the industrial guitars. He says, quote, Marilyn's the best. He's such a good friend. He's played Barbies with my daughter. Then Adam Waldman groans at the Manson music and buries his head under a pile of throw pillows. This doesn't dissuade Depp, who turns the sound up until the screen reads 99. So I think this is also a funny image here too. Again, for you Waldman stans, just to imagine that, like, Depp comes in and he's all excited to show this Marilyn Manson video that no one's really in the mood for, and he cranks it up, and then Waldman is just, like, trying to bury his head under her pillows, like, stop, and then Depp cranks it up even more. So the interviewer then, he tells Depp that he needs to get some sleep. And so Depp escorts him, out of the building, and they say their goodbyes for that night. Now, just a couple of things to skip through this article, but a couple of things that I think are interesting that are said about Depp's behavior and his financial situation. One thing is that apparently after the death of his mother, he still had a number of family members that were living on the Kentucky estate, and that were also using credit cards supplied by Depp, and basically that it sounds like Depp was, for years, has been bankrolling multiple members of his family, not just his sister, who is close to him and helps him, but also this other sibling and multiple family members. And basically what ended up happening is that at a certain point, Depp's financial managers said to him, you've got to do something about this family that is, like, sucking you dry. And Depp could never get up the resolve to do it. Like, he said he wanted to do it, and he said that he wanted his management to do it, but they said he could never actually pull the trigger on it. And so again, I think it's, a recurring theme that keeps coming up in these interviews with friends and people who know Depp are these anecdotes about how generous, almost to a fault, he is. And something else that the article also discusses is that at a certain point, Depp's financial situation became so dire that it became necessary to sell the French estate. It was actually a village that he bought and renovated, an abandoned French village that he bought, so multiple buildings, and renovated and then this estate. And it was where he lived with his French partner, Vanessa Paradis, and his two children. And apparently it was very expensive, tens of millions of dollars, right? And so apparently he was going to unload it. He decided he was going to sell it. But he got a call from his daughter, from Lily Rose, and she was crying, and she basically was saying, like, how can you sell the home where I grew up? And so he decided not to, but I noticed that it's back on the market now, and you know, with good reason. I mean, he's basically been blackballed in Hollywood, more or less, and so I'm sure that things are financially as difficult as they've ever been, unfortunately. Okay, so the rest of this article, it's going to get into the situation just a bit with Amber Heard. So I want to read a bit of it, and of course understand that that this article came out in, when was it? 2018. So there's obviously a lot that's happened since then. All right, it says, in our conversations in London, Depp's ugly 2016 divorce from Heard is the subject that dare not say its name, but it is inextricably linked to Depp's troubles. Before Depp met Heard, his relationship with women was publicly chivalrous. Depp and Heard met on the set of The Rum Diary, an odd, unsuccessful ode to Hunter S. Thompson's early reporting years. Depp's sister, Christy, was apparently opposed to their marriage, and that opposition led to a strain on her relationship with her brother. I talked about this earlier. Depp's last constant connection to the real world was severed when his relationship broke down with Christy because of her opposition to Amber Heard. Depp spent $1 million on the wedding held on his Bahamian island. And then it's going to talk about the episode when his mother died, and basically when Amber and Io Till It Right staged the fake assault incident. And of course, the police were later called and found no evidence of any assault and no damage to Amber's face or anything. Okay, so you can look, I go over this in another video. You can look at my other Amber Heard videos. And so it talks about some of the stuff that happened with them. Then it talks about J.K. Rowling and Fantastic Beasts and so on and so forth. And Depp says, and so Depp talks about the acute depression that he entered as his personal and financial lives came crashing down simultaneously. So imagine this. Not only is his marriage to Amber Heard ending in a really tumultuous and problematic way with these false allegations that she presented and fake bruises and everything, but also, he had found out not too long before this that he had lost hundreds of millions of dollars and was almost basically broke. All right. And he says, I was as low as I believe I could have gotten. The next step was, you're going to arrive somewhere with your eyes open, and you're going to leave there with your eyes closed. I just couldn't take the pain every day. So I'm sure that those two things happen at the same time. Either one of them, the financial and the Amber Heard, would have been enough in and of itself, right? But both of them at the same time. And so he talks about how he went on tour with the Hollywood Vampires and he decided to write a memoir on an old manual typewriter, just like his hero Hunter S. Thompson. He says, quote, I poured myself a vodka in the morning and started writing until the tears filled my eyes and I couldn't see the page anymore. And it says, once again, he wipes his eyes with the sleeves of his white shirt and continues his monologue. Quote, I kept trying to figure out what I'd done to deserve this. I'd tried being kind to everyone, helping everyone, being truthful to everyone. He pauses for a moment. The truth is most important to me. And all this still happened. Anyway, so most of the rest of this article is really more about the financial situation. There's a couple of other anecdotes that are interesting. He tells a story about how he gave pubic lice to his roommates back when he was first starting out in LA, and he said that he and his roommates were living in an apartment together, and he said that he had spent a night in what he called a flop house, which is basically this really, really shitty hotel. And he apparently says that he believes he picked up pubic lice there, because then he said that after he came home a couple of days later, everybody, all of his roommates were itching. And so anyway, he says, he tells this story, and he says, but they couldn't complain too much because one of my roommates was a bank robber. And so apparently Johnny Depp, and he tells this story, and the interviewer said that he looked it up, and he validated it was true that one of the people that Johnny Depp, one of his friends that he lived with in his early years before he hit it big in LA, was someone who later became a bank robber. So I think that was kind of interesting. But anyway, and I also now want to look just briefly at the GQ article. I don't think that the GQ article is as interesting, but it does have some interesting details. Now, understand that Johnny requested the GQ article because he was so unhappy with how he believed the Rolling Stone article had been written and how unfair it was. And so the GQ article, it's not a fluff piece, but the writer is kinder and I think fairer to Johnny Depp. So the title of this article is Johnny Depp Will Not Be Buried. And I'm going to speak a little more softly because it is getting later at night here. I always have someone that I have to worry about that I'm keeping up here, which is fine. But I'm going to speak a little more softly. But the title of the article is Johnny Depp Will Not Be Buried. And again, I just want to tell you some of the interesting things that come out of this article. And this article, also an older one, written in 2018, again, after the Rolling Stone article had come out. And so this article actually takes place at Johnny Depp's villa in Saint-Tropez in France. Remember this village that I said that he bought and renovated, and I showed you some pictures. You can see the pictures. And so he brings the interviewer out here, and so it's kind of an interesting setup. And there's not really a lot that I want to talk about with this article, but I just want to look at a couple of sections here. One is that the article is, I think, much more sympathetic to what Johnny Depp has gone through. And so it focuses more on the sense of tragedy that he feels about his life. It says there's something about the torment of the past few years that, intentionally or not, shakes such spiky subjects, his breakup, his reputation, his financial problems, that it brings those to the surface. Quite simply, they are in the air. I can feel it. Depp can feel it. And without even being nudged, the topics fall onto the table and demand to be picked at. Depp, one can see, feels he has suffered, sounding at times like a wounded animal who has healed and is now ready to bite back. He is also, although he may deny it, angry about a lot of things, and he's absolutely, categorically certain of his position and his standing. Depp says, the last 3 or 4 years has felt like a perverse situation that was inflicted on me. It hurts. He says, listen, I know I was never going to be Cinderella. I know this, and I accept it. But it felt like within a very, very short period of time that suddenly this version, for lack of a better word, of Cinderella had been immediately turned into the beast. He's Quasimodo. So he's saying, look, I know that being a figure in the public eye, that there are going to be times when you're going to be misunderstood, you're going to be disliked or whatever. He said, I didn't expect to be Cinderella. He says, but it feels like I turned from Cinderella, from being this darling that the press loves, to now being this ugly beast. And, that's the thing. That's one of the things that's problematic about cancel culture that I discussed somewhat in my other videos, is the fact that people, on a dime, basically, and just allegations, and in Johnny Depp's case, just one ex's allegations, that someone's whole world can just be flipped, that they can go from being this exalted figure in the media, this star, to then being an object of scorn and slander and rumor and things like that. And, of course, people have talked about before that the media likes to pump people up and make them huge superstars, so then it's even more dramatic when they tear them down. And there might be something in that for sure. And it's kind of like that quote in Batman: you either what in the Dark Knight, you either die a hero or you live to see yourself become the villain. And there might be something to that. I hope things turn around soon for Johnny. I think they already maybe are in the public mind. And so he says, I could feel people look at me differently because of the accusations toward me. And then people start putting things in magazines. They say, he's insane. He needs to take a sanity test. Ludicrous stuff. But the only thing that I could do was know what I still know. Ultimately, the truth will come out in all of this, and I will be standing on the right side of the roaring rapids. I hope other people will be too. I know the truth, and if I had to walk away from it all today, the job, the career, all of it, and go toodaloo, then fine. Now, whether he really means that or whether he's trying to convince himself of that, convince himself that he's okay with it all going away, I don't know. But it's interesting the stuff that he says here. He says, I've got nothing to prove to anyone because I've never been in competition with anyone. I don't buy into that shit. I'm not interested in receiving any spray-painted action figures. He's talking about Academy Awards. Spray-painted action figures. Maybe whatever this thing is, whatever I leave behind, my legacy to my kids or the people, I haven't watched 98% of that shit. He's saying, I haven't watched 98% of all the stuff that's out there, being said about me. Or even, I don't know if he's even maybe talking about his films too. But he says, I haven't watched 98% of that shit. It may be completely insane. It may be crap. It may be interesting. I don't fucking know what it is. But what I do know is that I did something. And I tried something different for a period of years. He's talking about his career now. He says, I did something. I tried something different for a period of years. But I did it, and I'm fine to stop. And he talks more now about his characters and so on and so forth. And so, again, I think that this article is just interesting because it gives us a little more insight into his mindset, at least during this period of time where he was really just starting to fight Amber Heard. Was either at that point fighting or was gearing up to fight, and was certainly had been fighting the financial battles as well. The interviewer says, I feel like I have to broach this subject with Depp. Does the actor consider himself a violent man, an aggressive man? Can he lose his temper, or is he prone to if intoxicated? Depp says this, the thing that hurt me is being presented as something that I'm really as far away from as you could possibly get, And that's interesting because that's actually what a number of his friends and people who know him and have stuck up for him have said about him, is that what the image of him that Amber Heard and her charges has presented of this violent man is actually, it's like a complete opposite of who he is. Joe Perry, who's toured with him on the Hollywood Vampires, famously said that he was the least violent person on the planet. And of course, one of the guys that he worked with, I forget his name right now, but one of the stars of Pirates of the Caribbean, who knows him very well, has said the same thing. Helena Bonham Carter has basically said the same thing. Multiple people, right? It says, Depp goes quiet again. It seems like he needs to take stock every so often, to recharge, to get back into a specific lane or mood every time the conversation veers into talking about the volatile relationship with Heard and the results of its breakdown. And so now Johnny Depp's going to start talking about Amber Heard and what she did to him with the false allegations and all of that. He says, quote, to harm someone you love as a kind of bully, meaning that, he's saying, I would never harm someone, I would never be a bully, and yet she's accusing me of this, right? He says, to harm someone you love as a kind of bully? No, it couldn't even sound like me. So initially, I just kept my mouth shut, I knew it was going to stick on me, and it would get weirder, but keep going, I ain't going to get into a pissing contest with someone about it. Spit out what you need to spit out, and, my attorneys will take care of the rest. I never went out and spoke. So he's saying here, look, my attitude was, I'm going to let her say what she needs to say. I'm going to let her, spit this stuff out, and then I'll have my attorneys deal with it. I don't want to have to actively go out there and refute it. And then he says, but of course, I care what my family and my kids think. I mean, you realize right away, essentially, that what is being done is the commencement of what they hope is to be your funeral. Now listen to what he says there again. I think that's interesting. He says, you realize right away that what is being done is the commencement of what they hope is to be your funeral. So he's saying that when this thing started, that he knew that not only Amber Heard and her supporters, but that the media, that all of these people, the media machine and Amber Heard and all of this, that they were rooting for his demise. They wanted to see him go down. And this kind of like unfathomable, vindictiveness and so forth, coming from someone, and someone that he had loved and had taken care of and had been so patient with in terms of Amber and so forth. He says, and worse than that, to take away future earnings that are for my kids. How could anyone, come out with something like that against someone when there's no truth to it whatsoever? I'm sure it wasn't easy for my 14-year-old boy to go to school, you know what I mean? With people going, hey, look at this magazine, man. What, your dad beats up chicks or something? Why did he have to go through that? Why did my daughter have to go through that? I tell Depp I can see how that would anger him. Depp is all too aware that some of the intricacies of his and Heard's relationship needs to be put in the third person. This is why at times he will start off using a subjective pronoun but switch to something more objective, swapping she for that person. In other words, Depp at times, because he wants to be legally careful about what he says, he'll start to refer to Amber Heard as she, but then he'll say that person. I'm not sure really what the difference is, but that's what's going on here. Depp says, why didn't that person, meaning Amber Heard, why didn't that person speak to the police? I mean, she spoke to the police, but the police saw nothing, and they offered her an emergency medical technician. She said no. They offered to file a report. Police see nothing on her. Police see nothing broken in the place, no marks. And then they offer her an EMT to have a look at her, and she says no. And I don't know if it was the next day or a couple of days later, but then there was a bruise. Then there was a red mark. Then there was a brown bruise. And then he talks about this party that Amber Heard went to, that we've talked about before, that she went to Amanda de Cadenet's 44th birthday party. And a photo was taken there and posted on Amanda de Cadenet's Instagram of Amber Heard and Amanda de Cadenet and Amber Valletta. And Amber Heard has very sort of craftily put her hair down in front of her face, but you can see even underneath it that her eye is not swollen. There's no mark there or anything, right? And of course, that picture ended up getting pulled down once people noticed it. It says, though, Depp says, she was at a party the next day. Her eye wasn't closed. She had her hair over her eye, but you could see the eye wasn't shut. 25 feet away from her. How the f*** am I going to hit her? Which, by the way, is the last thing I would have done. So, I think that, and then Depp says, we probably shouldn't be talking about this, but I am worried. I worry about the people that brought it, and I worry about her. It's just not right. I will never stop fighting. I'll never stop. An episode like this takes time to get over. It's a mourning for someone you thought was... Okay, in other words, what's going on here is, first of all, it's interesting. He says, I think very sweet, that he says he worries about Amber Heard. And you can tell, you can see that, you can hear that in the audio tapes, that audio tape that was released, that was made after she had filed for divorce, and they're on the phone, and he's pleading with her to retract these charges and to let this go and to reach an agreement with him and so forth. And he's saying, look, this is not good for you. This is going to ruin your reputation. And he says it here. He says, I worry about her. And then he says, so at the end, and then he says, it's hard to get over. It's a mourning process for someone you thought was, and then he trails off. And there's a pause, and then the interviewer tries to fill in. He says, the love of your life. And Johnny Depp says, well, something. I did marry her somehow, which I think is a really kind of like sad, thing. Like, he doesn't even want to say that she was the love of his life because it's turned out to be such a disaster, and she turned out to be such a crazy fraud or whatever, right? Who's destroying his life, trying to destroy him. So he doesn't even want to say she was the love of my life. But of course, what else is there to say? Because it's the truth. And we even heard on the audio tape that I just referenced, even after they're splitting up, after she has made all of these false allegations against him in the press and is trying to ruin him, and he still says, I love you. I love you more than anything. I always will. It's very tragic, but it says something about the kind of man that he is. So anyway, the interview goes on, and I think that basically I've told you the most interesting parts. There is one part where he talks about his mother again and his childhood. I'll say a little bit here, a little bit more. This quote from Depp. He says, I mean, my childhood was dark. My mom would not edit. There was no editing, meaning she wouldn't self-censor. Like, she just said whatever she thought or whatever she wanted to, no matter how awful or how abusive or whatever. He says, no matter how wrong it might have been or how hideously evil it was in the moment, she didn't edit. It came out. Blah. She was out of her mind, obviously. She got 4 kids and she hated the world. Was there physical abuse? Yeah. And never ending, to the point that pain, physical pain, was just a given. But the last 4 or 5 years that I was involved, let's say, well, that was quite a dark time too. Now, it's interesting here. I've talked about before how I really think that, and it's kind of a no-brainer, but that I really think that his relationship with his mother then paved the way for him to get into this relationship with Amber Heard and stay in it, and even through all the abuse and everything. And it's interesting how he talks about how mean his mother was, all the abuse, and he calls her hideously evil even, or he says the things that she would say would be hideously evil, and she would just spew this stuff out, right? These horrible things. Well, what we know about his relationship with Amber is that when Amber, especially when Amber would get drunk, but that Amber would frequently, just all the time, was just, it was just constantly, especially when she was drunk, saying horrible things, calling Johnny a fat old man and washed up and horrible father, and screaming and beating on him and everything. So it really does seem like the mom was really the prototype for that. And so at the end, Johnny, after talking about his mother, then Johnny says, but the last 4 or 5 years of my life, they've been a dark time too. So he's comparing his time with Amber to his time with his mother, and he's making this sort of implicit comparison. I'm not even sure if he's really aware of that he's doing it, but he's making this connection between the two, which is really psychologically revealing. So they talk more about things, and he talks about Hunter S. Thompson a bit, and so on, and that's really the end of the interview. And so I hope you've enjoyed this. It's not been one of my fancier videos, but again, I'm kind of taking a breather. I am going to try to put out a video on Woody Allen, because that controversy's gotten whipped up again, and there's going to be a 4-part HBO documentary that's starting on Sunday and will air over a series of 4 weeks. And then there'll be another coming up pretty soon, another Marilyn Manson update video. So for my new Marilyn Manson Defender fans, I will be talking more about that and updates and the things that I've learned since then and so on. Okay, so again, I always appreciate, since most of my videos, almost all of them are not monetized because they're too controversial for ads on YouTube. I do appreciate any tips, PayPal, Patreon, but if nothing else, I always appreciate your subscriptions first and foremost. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I'll see you later. Bye.